Hey everyone, let's jump right into solving dSAT official number 2. Let's start with question 20 in module 1. If I look at these choices, I can see that some are verbs and some are not verbs. Let's label them quickly. Verb, not verb, not verb, not verb. The reason why, in case you forgot, is 2 plus verb is not a verb anymore, ing is not a verb anymore. So let's check to see what we need. Right now I'm leaning toward A, because this looks like a 3v1. I'm going to start after the comma after scarce to look for the independent clause. Embryos inside African turquoise killifish eggs. And then if I skip the underline, a dormant state known as diapause. There is no verb currently in any of this, which means that we must add a verb to make this not be a fragment. Therefore, the answer is A. We needed the verb in this 3v1. Number 21. All of these are verbs, and there's tense differences. This makes me think that this might be a verb tense question, but it could potentially also be a subject-verb agreement question. But if you look in the passage, by the end of the 1990s, this indicates a specific time frame. So this is a tense question. We need past tense. Let's look at the tense. Remember, tense only comes from the first word. It does not come from the second word. So I can ignore double in A, B, and D. Has is present, had is past, doubles is present, and will is future. Since the 1990s is in the past, we need past. Therefore, the answer must be B. 22. It's all the same words. The punctuation is different, suggesting that this is a fragment run-on question type. Let's look to see if we need to combine independent clauses or not. Counters is our first verb. That is starting a dependent clause. We have a verb retain, which will be the verb for the dependent clause. And then we have another verb, is. Whatever noun comes before the verb is will be the subject of a new clause, in this case TMAO. Since we have an independent clause with the verb counters and an independent clause with the verb is, we need to combine two independent clauses. We can cross out this entire part if that makes it easier to see. In this case, the only option that can combine two independent clauses is A, with a period. 23. These are all verbs, which means that this is either subject-verb agreement or tense. The character of Linda, so character is going to be the subject that we are matching. It's not Linda, because Linda comes after a preposition of, and the subject can never come after a preposition. Character, experienced, had experiences. If you look at the answer choices, all of these match with character, which means this is not a subject-verb agreement question. We need to look somewhere else to find the correct tense. The character of Linda. Maybe there's another character that we can find somewhere in the passage. Character of bin. Connects. That is a pretty good hint because connects is present tense. We need to match with present tense. So the answer is C. Connects matches with experiences. 24. This is a spanna question. In case you forgot, spanna is singular, possessive, apostrophe, no apostrophe. Those make up 4 options. The NA with the lowercase a is just one option that stands for no apostrophe. We need to figure out what we need in terms of singular, possessive, apostrophe, and no apostrophe. In this case, because we're dealing with the object at the end, it cannot be a subject-verb agreement question. That means this is essentially a pronoun question because we're figuring out the original noun and matching with singular or plural. If you look farther up in the passage, screw is singular, which means that we need a singular option for screw. That removes B and D. If you compare A and C, you wouldn't have another possessive here, because a possessive is an adjective, not a noun. We need to have threads as a plural noun that has no apostrophe. This means that the answer is C. The threads are the noun or the thing that the screw has, and the screw is singular because it's singular earlier in the passage. 25 looks like a fragment run-on question because the main content and words are the same, and we have different punctuation and the option to add a conjunction. This might be a super comma question because of this strange semicolon and, but we should just verify to make sure. If you quickly scan the passage, you can see that there's no list, which means that this cannot be a super comma question because those are only for lists. This means we can remove A immediately. Now what we have to do is figure out what there is after the quote. So we're starting with an apt assessment. This is a modifier called an appositive. What that means is you have a noun phrase modifying another noun or another noun phrase. Let me give a simpler example so you can see. Bob, comma, my friend from school, comma, is nice. This type of modifier always requires comma, which means that we are forced to use C because it has a comma before an apt assessment. The phrase an apt assessment is a noun phrase that's modifying the quote. It's saying what type of assessment it is. It's apt. 26. These all have the same words and they have different punctuation types. This looks to me like it might be the conjunction trick question because the word rather has contrast, and that means that we have to make sure that the contrast is applying in the right direction. Let's look at the passage to see which way the contrast should go. To humans, it does not appear that the golden orb weaver spider uses camouflage to capture its prey. This is a complete idea already, so I'm leaning towards C. There's nothing before the word prey that has a contrasting element, right? The humans, it does not appear that the golden orb weaver spider uses camouflage to capture its prey. We need the contrast to connect whatever we just read with whatever is coming next. If you replace the word rather with instead, I think this would make more sense. Instead, or rather, the brightly covered arachnid seems to wait conspicuously in the center. The contrast is between camouflage and conspicuous, or visually obvious. That means that the rather has to connect the parts before the underline and the parts after the underline, which means that D is correct. 27 looks like another spanna question, because I see singular, plural, apostrophe, and no apostrophe options. This means that we have to figure out earlier in the passage whether playa is singular or plural. Let's find that word. Playa at the very beginning of the passage is singular. This eliminates the plural options A and D. We need a possessive. B and C both have possessive. That means the only thing left to consider is rocks. Do we need a possessive plural rocks, or do we just have rocks without a possessive? In this case, we need to have possessive because we have another noun, migration. The trails mark the rocks migration. You wouldn't be able to just put another noun after rocks. That would be kind of weird. That would be like saying, I ate Bob cookies. You can't just have two nouns in a row like this. You fix it by adding an apostrophe S. I ate Bob's cookies. That's the same thing that's happening here. The rocks are migrating, so you would have playa's sediment mark the rocks' mysterious migration, because the rocks are migrating. Therefore, the answer must be C. 28. The word is the same in every choice and the punctuation is different, which means that this is probably a fragment run-on question type. I see the word while, which I know will create a dependent clause. In case you're a little confused about that, let me take a simple sentence. I ran. This would work on its own as a sentence. Let me repeat it. I ran. If I add while to the beginning, while I ran, this entire thing no longer works as a sentence or as a complete thought. The while is creating a dependent clause. That means that we're starting with a dependent clause here. That also helps us understand that we're going to need a verb. The verb, in this case, is offers, which means that the noun that comes before offers will be the subject of this dependent clause. In this specific clause, the subject will probably be the title of the novel. Her 2019 novel, Gingerbread, offers a delicious twist. That means we have to go with C. You can never put punctuation between a subject and verb unless you have matching punctuation for a parenthetical. What I mean by that is Bob, comma, after school, comma, ran. You're allowed to do this if you have two punctuation of the same type to make a parenthetical, but if you only have one punctuation, you can't separate a subject and verb. Question 20. I'm going to start by looking at the answer choices to see what's similar or different. I can see that these are all verbs, which means that I'm probably dealing with some kind of subject-verb agreement question. Or the other option might be tense. Let's look in the passage. If I'm starting after the period, in addition, Zufall something selling the product under a child-friendly name, Play-Doh, I can see that there are several verb options that would work with Zufall in terms of raw subject-verb agreement. This means this is probably a tense question. And if I look up here, Zufall advised, this is past tense. So I'm probably just going to match past tense here with advised, past tense here with suggested. 21. If I look at the answer choices, I see that they all have the same words, and there's just differences in punctuation. It's unlikely to be A or B, because semicolon and period both combine independent clauses. But we should still verify. I'm going to go into the passage. I see comma, coordinating conjunction, which means that we're probably starting with an independent clause, starting with she. She also dedicated herself to mycology, the study of fungi. What I need to do now is start here and see if there's another independent clause after this point. I'm going to highlight things that could be verbs or potentially past participles. You can see that I've highlighted the word observed here. This looks like a verb that's connected to she. You might think at this point that we have another independent clause, but what's actually going on here is a little bit trickier than that. I'm going to zoom in so that I can do a little arrow. In English, you're allowed to have the word that be invisible, and that's what's happening here. Let's put the word that into the sentence so you can see how this is going. She dedicated herself to mycology, the study of fungi, producing more than 350 paintings of the fungal species that she observed in nature, and submitting her research on spore germination. This is actually a dependent clause. What we're probably dealing with here is comma ing, where this ing becomes a condition or status that applies to the main independent clause. Let me do an example of this because that's kind of abstract. I dieted over 6 months, comma, losing 20 pounds. You can have comma ing where the ing describes the entire clause or becomes a condition or status for the main clause. The main clause would be the part in brackets here. That's what's happening in this question. So the answer is D. 22. These all have the same content, but the words are in different orders. This suggests that this is likely a dangling modifier question. I'll start by highlighting the first noun in each option. Critics, use, apostrophe S is an adjective, so this is not going to be the noun that we're looking for. You should just cross off apostrophe S. Cross off the possessives. There. The word there here is technically an adverb, not a noun, but for the purposes of the dangling modifier question, you should still consider it to be invalid as an option. And finally, focus. Let's go back to the original passage and see if we can find some kind of ing and what noun it would match to. Assessing. That is the phrase, the participial or ing phrase that we need to match to a noun. So what can assess? Critics, use, there, or focus. This one is pretty clearly critic. Only critics can assess. So the answer must be A. Moving on to 23, I see that the punctuation is different, but the words are all the same in the answer choices. This could be a few things. Based on the fact that I see these semicolons and commas in an unusual distribution, I'm going to say that this is probably a super comma question. If you don't know what super comma is, you should probably go back and review the original notes section. It would be too long for me to review it here. The main thing to focus on is that we need parallel structure. Let's look at the third item, a Rosetta Stone language course in Chickasaw in 2015. That means that the date must come last. So the semicolon has to come after the date, and you can see that is what happens here. In 2010 semicolon. This semicolon in the passage separates the second item from the third item. We need the semicolon that separates the first item from the second item. The only option that has a semicolon after a date is C. Therefore the answer must be C. 24. The words are all the same in the answer choices, and I see differences of punctuation. This could be fragment run-on. This could maybe be parenthetical because of the fact that I see an em dash, but we should always verify rather than just blindly going with the em dash to match. Let's try to figure out what is being combined. The entire passage is one sentence, so unfortunately, I probably have to read the entire passage. The 47 geothermal springs of Arkansas's Hot Springs National Park are sourced via a process known as natural groundwater recharge, in which rainwater percolates downward through the earth. In this case, the porous rocks of the hills around Hot Springs to collect in a subterranean basin. You could tell that my inflection was a little bit weird when I read this because I wasn't sure where the parenthetical was. This is definitely a parenthetical question. We need to figure out what is the case. Does the parenthetical start at in, or does the parenthetical start at the? That's the question here. The in this case gives us a good clue about this. We're getting an example, which means that the parenthetical is probably the example. So I actually do want to grab the em dash. If I grab the em dash and C, this makes everything in the example in parentheses. You could imagine putting a parentheses here instead of an em dash, and then putting the other parentheses here. Let's read the sentence without the em dash parenthetical to make sure that it makes sense. Rainwater percolates downward through the earth to collect in a subterranean basin. This does make sense grammatically and in terms of meaning, which means that C is probably the right answer. I know that took a little bit of time, but it's worth your time to verify rather than just going for the obvious answer immediately and not checking. Because often you can get tricked by easy bluffs, like matching M dash to M dash. 25. This definitely looks like a fragment run-on question based on the fact that we have the same main word, varied, and we have different punctuation, and we have the option to add a conjunction or not add a conjunction. That means I don't need to read the whole passage. I'm going to start after the period and look to see what's being combined. The number of jams available for tasting varied. Some shoppers had 24 different options, others only 6. If you look at the part after the underline, you can see a verb, had, and the subject that connects to it is shoppers. I have an independent clause after the underline because there's no word that would make this a dependent clause. That means that I have to go with either A, C, or D. B creates a run-on. The reason this creates a run-on is because if you look before the underline, the verb is varied and the subject is number. Why is the subject not jams? That's because of is a preposition, and the subject can never be after a preposition. Let's see if we want a conjunction or if we want a colon. Because this is elaborating on the different number of options, the colon is a good choice as an elaboration. While would be contrast, but the information after the underline does not contrast the information before the underline. 26. This looks like another super comma question to me because of these weird semicolons. Let's try to figure out where a list item ends. If you look at the last item, you can see that it ends with a description. That means that the title comes first and then the description comes second. Based on that information, we would go with either B or D. Now we need to look at what happens after the title itself. After the title, in The Joys of Motherhood or Head Above Water, you can see that there is a comma. I'm actually going to erase the circles to make it easier to see and do an underline. There's a comma after the title, which means that we need a comma after the title to match. Therefore, the answer must be B. Alright everyone, that's all the questions for dSAT Official 2. Thanks for sticking with it. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments section. Thanks everyone. Have a good day.